I was 79 when I told the board, my daughters and the city that I was going to marry our cleaning lady. They thought I had finally gone senile. I could feel the whispers move through the room like cold air through an old keyhole. I saw lawyers lift their brows, bankers exchange looks, and my own blood, Caroline and Elise, force brittle smiles that cracked as soon as they turned away. They smiled because that was the polite thing to do when the old billionaire says something that threatens the neat script of inheritance. But their eyes said the quiet part aloud. He has lost it, and we will fix him. Her name was Leah, 29, born in a town most of them could not pronounce without sneering. She had come into my life through a subcontractor when my estate manager cut staff and outsourced maintenance. She arrived with a bucket, gloves, and a posture that made herself smaller than she was, as if the world had trained her to take up less space. I noticed the way she handled the old things, the fragile ones that mattered only to me. The crystal box of my late wife's brooches, the music box that no longer played, the mahogany rail polished to a dark glow. She cleaned like a curator preserves a museum, and that broke something open in me, because I realized how long it had been since anyone touched my life with care rather than calculation. The first time we spoke, really spoke, she asked why I kept the broken music box. I told her it was the last thing my wife touched before the hospital bed swallowed us both whole. She didn't offer condolences. She wound it, listened to the silence, and said softly, "Sometimes the spring is fine. It's the teeth that slip." A week later, she returned from her lunch break with a tiny file and a folded sheet of instructions, and under a cone of afternoon light in the library, she fixed the mechanism while I pretended to read. When the box chimed again, a thin, stubborn tune, it felt like warmth returning to a hand I had forgotten was numb. Before long, I realized mornings were organized around her arrival. Coffee tasted sharper when she was in the hall. Numbers aligned when I knew she was on the third floor, dusting my dad's photographs without flinching. She never asked me for anything, not once. The absence of ask was louder than every fundraiser pitch I had endured in a lifetime. That silence invited me to speak. I found myself telling stories I'd locked away, building the first warehouse in a flooded lot, sleeping on rickety cots with men who wanted the same thing I did, proof that we could rise on our own sweat. She listened, not worshipful, not greedy, attentive in a way that made me feel visible rather than exhibited. When I told her I was going to take her to dinner, she shook her head. "Someone will take a photo. Your daughters will think I did this." She was right. Of course, but I was too old to live polite lies and too alive to keep pretending that discreet affection was nobler than honest commitment. I did not need permission. I needed truth. And the truth was this. I wanted to marry a woman who had restored sound to the one instrument I believed the world had broken forever. So I told them. The boardroom, the family, the friends who had stayed long enough to forget how they once began. I told the drivers, the kitchen staff, the gardeners whose worries I had carried on payrolls for decades. I told the city that had named a theatre after me and would name a scandal after me next. I said I would marry Leah Morales in autumn, in the garden behind the east wing where the magnolias bloom late. And then the laughter started. It was not the loud guffaw of a joke well told. It was smaller, meaner, the kind of laughter people let slip when they are both afraid and thrilled, afraid that money might slip from their fingers, thrilled that age had finally humbled the man they fed on for years. My lawyer slid a folder across the table like a coroner presenting the sheet. Prenups. Evaluations. Recommendations to de-risk the union. My daughters wanted guardianship assessments for your protection, Dad. Reporters camped at the iron gates and hollered questions through the bars. Are you buying a wife, Mr. Hale? Are you grooming poverty? Are you afraid of dying alone? On the evening news, a glossy anchor with white teeth said the word scandal with a little purr. I poured a drink I didn't want and stood on the balcony while the city's lights glared back like a jury. I could have retreated. I could have called a doctor to label me fatigued, a psychiatrist to label me fragile, a PR firm to label me misunderstood. But I had built an empire by walking into storms while men with softer shoes waited for paths to dry. I had one life, a finite number of morning coffees, and a woman who looked at my ghosts and refused to give them power. So I did not retreat. I called Leah into the library, set the broken music box between us like an oath, and said, "They can laugh, but I am asking you anyway. Will you marry me?" Her mouth trembled. She looked at the box. She looked at me. And with a steadiness that steadied me in return, she said yes. I wish the story ended there. Simple, clean, generous to the heart. But that is not how money or families or cities behave when you disobey their script. As soon as she said yes, the machinery began to grind, gears hidden in walls I built myself. And as the noise rose, I learned that laughter was only the first sound in a symphony of sabotage. The notes that followed would make the blood in my veins run cold because they carried messages I never expected to hear from voices I loved. And as the music shifted, I understood something terrible and clarifying. The box was not the only thing with slipping teeth. The people close to me had been filed down by envy until they no longer caught on love at all. But the worst was still to come. I live in Ravensbridge, a city that congratulates itself on elegance while hiding its bruises behind topiary and glass. My house sits on a hill older than my company and kinder than most of the people I've enriched. From that hill, I have watched seasons arrive with a rhythm that used to calm me. In winter, fog lowers itself like a thoughtful curtain. In spring, the magnolias swell and burst in slow motion, reminding me that beauty often takes its time. Summer makes the lawns shimmer, and autumn turns the maples the color of regret. It was in autumn, after my announcement, that the city seemed to turn toward me with a singular expression. Amusement dipped in hunger. I've spent my life speaking in numbers, contracts, shipping lanes. To reach the age of 79, with a spine that still holds, you learn to speak in deal heat and supply shocks. But in this season, I found myself speaking in another language altogether. The language of whispers at charity galas, of smiles edged like glass, of headlines that say one thing while meaning another. It was like returning to a country I once fled. I had seen those smiles when I was 20, poor and hungry. They were the same smiles now, only painted with better lipstick. They said, "Welcome to the room where we decide what your truth is. Sit down, old man. We'll take it from here. You who are listening, who have known the sting of being underestimated, you will understand what happened next." The calls became campaigns. Old friends asked to meet for coffee and slid warnings across the table like threats in envelopes. The foundation board insisted on temporary oversight to assure donors my judgment remained unimpaired. An investigative reporter emailed a list of questions that read like a confession they expected me to sign. Was Ms. Morales compensated in cash or gifts beyond her wages? Did Ms. Morales receive lodging on the property distinct from other staff? Had Ms. Morales been alone with me on trips? Did I understand the power imbalance? I might have laughed if it hadn't cut so close to a wound I did not want to name. Not that I was too powerful, but that I had never truly been allowed to be simply a man, wanting. If you are still with me, stay, because what I need to tell you is not a defense. It is a confession of a different sort. I have been wrong before. I have built things too quickly and broken things I should have preserved. I have mistaken loyalty for silence and generosity for control, but I am not wrong about this. Love is not an asset class. It is not a clause. It is not a hedge. It is a risk with no model and no exit liquidity except the courage to say yes again every morning. When I asked Leah to marry me, I did not stake my fortune. I staked whatever remained of my courage. And here is the part you might not expect. I do not want your sympathy. I want your attention. I'm telling you what happened because if you have ever been told to sit down and wait for permission to be alive, you will recognize the pattern. They will dress their fear as concern, They will call their greed stewardship. They will say they are protecting you from embarrassment while marching you toward a private execution, not of your life, perhaps, of your right to choose it. When I told the world I would marry Leah, I had a second goal beyond love. I wanted to see who would stand with me when the tune changed. The calls came, the laughter sharpened, and then the first twist arrived, not from a boardroom, but from the basement stairs. My housekeeper of 25 years, Marta, handed me a velvet pouch she said she found behind a loose panel in the wine cellar. Inside was a ring, not my late wife's, not mine. A ring that did not belong in my house at all. Delicate, modern, too new to be part of our history. Tucked inside the pouch, a folded receipt from a jeweler downtown, dated 6 weeks earlier, made out not to me, not to Leah, but to someone whose name I had not spoken in months. My son-in-law, Russell. Why does a man buy a ring and hide it in his father-in-law's cellar? Why does he do it after the father-in-law announces he will marry a woman the family disdains? Why is the jeweler's receipt folded around a handwritten note that reads simply, "Not here"? The questions multiplied, and with them, the ache in my chest that felt too much like betrayal to be ignored. I knew then that the house I had filled with art and music and hired loyalty contained a secret no amount of money could insure against. I started looking at everything differently. Footsteps I had trusted for years sounded furtive. Doors I believed were closed seemed slightly ajar. I am asking you to keep listening, because what followed will sound like fiction, and yet it is the most honest account of my life I have ever offered. I'm telling you this because someone will laugh at you too, someday, for loving the wrong person at the wrong time in a way that makes their scaffolding wobble. And when they laugh, you will need proof that standing your ground is possible. Take my proof, hold it, let it warm your hands in the cold, and understand that every choice I made from this point forward carved a path I could not step back from once I began. People say I am stubborn, perhaps. But stubbornness is only perseverance wearing its work clothes. I put them on. I went downstairs. I began to ask questions aloud. If this is your first time hearing my voice, subscribe to it. Stay with me. I am not offering entertainment. I am offering the map of a storm. I'm offering the names of the winds. And I am offering a lit match in a basement where someone thought darkness would keep me harmless, because the first ring was only a signpost. The road beyond it would take me through rooms I thought I owned and show me who really held the keys. And as I followed it, step by careful step, I realized the laughter outside was the least of my worries. Inside my house, a quieter plot was already unfolding, and it had my name on it. But the worst was still to come. The morning after Marta found the ring, Leah did not come to work. She texted the estate manager apologizing for the absence, saying there had been a small emergency at her apartment. She would be in the next day. The message arrived at the exact minute a gossip site published a story with a headline designed to draw blood without leaving fingerprints. Cleaning lady climbs stairs. Billionaire's bride-to-be, raised in the shadows. The article packaged facts like weapons. It named her high school. It named an eviction from 3 years ago. It made artful suggestions about immigration paperwork without committing to a single accusation. The comments did what comments do. They reached for the throat and called it conversation. I closed the page, but the words did not close back. They stuck to my hands. I called Leah. No answer. I messaged simply, "I'm here, no pressure, take your time." An hour later she replied, "I'm okay. Please don't come. I need to handle this alone." My instinct was to ignore that request and charge into the storm. Age teaches you when to sit on your hands. I waited. I looked at the ring on my desk, small and quiet, and thought about Russell. My daughter Elise had married him 7 years ago, against my better judgment and with my reluctant blessing. He was handsome the way a corporate brochure is handsome. Clean lines, empty eyes. He came from money he had not made. He smiled like a job interview. He had the hunger of a man who believed entitlement counted as vision. I gave him a position he didn't earn because I loved my daughter and wanted peace. I called my security chief, Dean, a man who does not waste verbs. Find out who else has been in the wine cellar, I said. Not the list I'm supposed to have, the truth. He grunted assent. Before he hung up, he added, You might want to look at the foundation servers. We've had an unusual amount of outbound traffic. I felt the familiar click in my brain when pieces start to align. Money attracts many kinds of predators. Some feed in daylight, others prefer the crawl space. When love enters the room, both kinds show their teeth. By evening, Leah's small emergency had a smell to it, char and wet plaster. A faulty space heater in her building had sparked a fire. It was contained quickly, but her unit was damaged by water and smoke. She sent a photo only after I promised not to post it, not to forward it, not to use it as currency in my war with the world. The ceiling was blackened. Her books were a collapsed shelf of grey. A small framed photo of her mother sat on the counter, its glass cracked down the middle like a line drawn between yesterday and today. I asked if she needed a hotel. She refused. I ordered one anyway, on a card that could not be traced to me. She found out and cancelled it. I clenched my jaw and tried again with cash delivered in an envelope by Marta's nephew. She accepted only half and asked him to tell me to stop trying to rescue her like a princess in a tower. Tell him I can climb stairs, she said. Pride like that does not scare me. It steadies me. Meanwhile, the board called an emergency session. They wanted to postpone the gala scheduled for next month until reputational risk stabilizes. What they meant was, until Leah is gone. I told them the gala would proceed. I told them Leah would attend as my fiancée. They smiled with their teeth and said, Of course. Then Caroline, my eldest, sent me a private message suggesting we create a trust to ring-fence family assets from external volatility. The phrase external volatility sat on the screen like a toxin. I asked if she meant Leah. She replied with a string of euphemisms. I told her plain language was the only currency she could spend with me now. She hung up. Dean returned with news. Whoever hid that ring knew the blind spot. Only 3 people have used that corridor in the last month outside of staff shifts. Your son-in-law, your daughter Elise, and Leah. The last word lit a fuse. I did not want to doubt her, but doubt is not a thing you want. It is a thing that wants you. It prowled my skull while the city pretended to care about my well-being. I asked Dean to pull logs for the foundation servers. He did. The outbound traffic was a drip, not a flood. Small files, regular intervals, destinations masked with care. Someone is copying documents, he said, and they know how to keep the rhythm slow enough to pass under alarms. That night, I drove myself, against Dean's advice, to Leah's building. I found her on the sidewalk with 2 cardboard boxes and a face scrubbed of self-pity. She bristled when she saw me. I asked you not to come. I said simply, I'm not here to rescue you. I'm here to stand next to you. She exhaled. We carried the boxes to my car. On the way, a neighbor shouted something crude from a window. Leah flinched, then squared her shoulders. They only shout from upstairs, she said. No one says it on the sidewalk. There's a bravery to that kind of observation that humbles a man. She climbed into the car. She did not reach for my hand. She did not need to. I took her to a small apartment I kept for nights when the estate felt like a museum of ghosts. It had an old piano no one tuned and a view of the river that made winter more tolerable. I told her she could stay there as long as she needed. She said, 2 nights, maybe 3. She slept. I paced. At dawn, the music box chimed on my desk at the house as if to remind me that the world had teeth, and some of them were still catching. 2 days later, a second twist arrived. Dean traced the outbound foundation traffic to a private account created 18 months prior, using an identity that matched no employee. The password was a phrase I recognized because it was mine. A line I wrote to my late wife in the first year of our marriage. Only 3 people knew it now. Myself, Caroline, and Elise. Dean said carefully. The access happens at odd hours, consistent with someone who knows the building and has a reason to be there after events. I pictured the gala halls, The empty corridors, the staff quietly folding tablecloths, while daughters wandered in heels, phones in hand, faces lit by screens. The laughter outside had become an orchestra now. Talk shows debated the ethics of transactional unions. Op-eds squeezed my life into cautionary tales. People who had never lifted a finger of their own called me a predator. The cruelty did not surprise me. The coordination did. Meanwhile, inside, the theft was gentle, the way a hand stroking your hair can tilt your head to expose the neck. I asked Dean to plant a silent alarm on the foundation servers and a quiet camera in the corridor that led to the secret shelf where the ring had been found. If someone was moving through my life in shadows, I would not light every room yet. I would open my eyes wider. At the end of that week, the gala preparations resumed. Invitations were redesigned to include security guidelines. Donors tutted with concern and increased their pledges to support stability. The board congratulated itself on stewarding storms. I took Leah to choose a simple dress. She argued with me about paying. I told her I would sell a painting to buy that hour with her in a quiet boutique where no one knew her name. She rolled her eyes. She chose a dark blue dress that made her look like the river at night. She did not ask for jewelry. She did not need a spotlight. She was one. We returned to the apartment to find the door cracked. A page of the morning paper had been slid under it, folded to show the column where a private investigator offered an exclusive about Ms. Morales's past associations. I read it, lies, knotted to half-truths. The ache in my chest sharpened. I sat down. Leah sat beside me. She said, "I can leave." I said, "If you leave because of fear, you teach fear it can be our landlord." She was quiet, then nodded slowly. "Then let's pay with courage." I wished the story turned upward there. It didn't. Dean's alarm pinged at midnight on a Tuesday. Someone had entered the Foundation archive room and accessed files linked to donor agreements, political contributions, and chillingly, a folder labeled Succession. I watched the camera feed from my study as a slender figure in a black blazer moved with the confidence of someone at home. She turned her face once as she reached for a file. My stomach fell. It wasn't Elise. It wasn't Caroline. It wasn't Leah. It was my late wife's sister, Margaret, a woman who had stayed close all these years by the virtue of sharing blood with my dead. She looked into the lens without knowing it was there and smiled the smile she reserved for funerals. What was she taking? Why now? Why did she move like a woman who believed she could not be stopped? I called Dean. He was already on it. "Don't confront her yet," he said. "Let her walk the path. See where it leads." So I waited, muscles pulled tight as wire, while a woman I had trusted with holiday dinners eased documents into a sleek leather envelope. And as she closed the cabinet, the camera caught a sliver of paper peeking from the folder. Handwriting I knew. The letter I wrote to my wife the week we broke ground on our second warehouse. My apology letter. My vow. My secret, now in someone else's hands. Why would that be in a folder labeled Succession? Unless someone had been mapping my guilt, lining it up with levers. And if that was true, laughter was the wrong word for what had greeted my engagement. It was a signal. It meant go. It meant now. I felt the chill of recognition. Money is not the only fortune that can be stolen. Love is fortune too. Trust is fortune. And the thief who learns your hours can empty the vault without breaking a lock. I looked at Leah asleep on the couch, hair pushed off her face, breathing even. A woman who had fixed my music box and refused my hotel. And I knew the war I was in was larger than the headlines. It was a war over the right to define my future, to edit my past, to select which page of my life would be read aloud in rooms full of interested ears. I got up, put on a coat, and went to the Foundation. When I arrived, the corridor was empty, the air still. In the archive room, a drawer hung open like a mouth mid-syllable. I slid it shut gently. In the lock, a single strand of hair catches the light. Someone who belongs here. Someone who believes belonging is immunity. I was wrong about one thing. The worst had not arrived, but it was on its way, fast, precise, and wearing a face I recognized, because the next day before dawn, my lawyer called with a tone I had only heard once, when he told me my wife was gone. He said 5 words that turned the floor to water. Your family filed for conservatorship, and before I could speak, the line clicked, as if the world had hung up on me. But the worst was still to come. They moved fast. The petition was filed at 8. By 9, a leaker delivered it to the press with careful redactions that made the unredacted parts shine like neon. Concern for capacity, vulnerability to manipulation, evidence of impaired judgment. The evidence I discovered was a dossier thick enough to bruise. It included photos of me looking tired, presented as proof of decline. It included bank transfers authorized by me to cover medical expenses for an old friend framed as reckless generosity. It included a transcript of a conversation I thought was private, recorded without my consent, where I said quietly that some mornings the bed felt too wide. It included, exploded into center spread, a grainy security still of Leah and me carrying boxes into the apartment, captioned, Age Gap Escort. I have stood in boardrooms where we lost 100 million in an afternoon. I have never felt the slap of betrayal like that stapled stack of paper. I called Caroline first. She did not answer. I called Elise. Voicemail. I called Margaret. She picked up on the second ring as if she had been waiting. Arthur, she said, warm as tea. You must be shocked. But it's for the best, for the best. A phrase that has killed more marriages than infidelity. Where did you get the letter? I asked. Silence. Then the careful clink of a spoon in a cup. You left so many things in drawers, she said. It is not safe to keep the past where anyone can pick it up. Anyone like you, I said. Anyone like her, she said, and I could hear the nod in her throat. You don't understand what she is. What is she? I asked, and my voice, to my horror, trembled, not with fear but with fury struggling to come through small enough to fit in a phone wire. An opportunity, she said, almost tender, for the worst people, for the people waiting to pounce when a house drops its guard. The worst people are at my table, I said, and you brought the knives. She sighed. This will be less painful if you come quietly. I hung up. Then I called Dean. Document everything, I said. Chain of custody, server logs, camera feeds. I want a timeline I can lay like a railroad. He was already on it. And Arthur, he said, using my first name only when the ground shook. The court date is in 48 hours. I told Leah, and for the first time since this began, I saw fear break through her composure, not fear for herself. She grabbed my shoulders with hands that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner, a scent that had become home, and said, They will take you away from me and call it mercy. I said, They will try. She searched my face, as if looking for loose bricks. Then we have to show them who is loosening the house, she said. I grew up with people who were good at hiding their hands after they threw the stone. You taught me to name the thrower. We turned the apartment into a command center. Dean arrived with a thumb drive the size of a thumbnail and a face like a locked door. He laid out what he had. The server log showed repeated access to sensitive files from a device registered to Margaret's assistant. The assistant's paycheck was wired, not to the account on file, but to a shell company incorporated by Russell 2 years prior. The security camera caught Margaret in the archive room the same night the alarm pinged. The ring hidden in the wine cellar, Dean discovered, matched a custom order commissioned by Russell for a woman whose initials were not my daughter's. Lisa May, a consultant who had billed the foundation unusually high fees for strategic positioning. The lines of the map snapped into place. Russell had been preparing an exit route with someone else, using my foundation as a stepping stone, feeding Margaret the illusion of righteous protection by offering her the one thing she wanted most, leverage against me. In return, she gave him access. In return, he gave her the promise of a family restored to proper order, one where my daughters could inherit unchallenged by a wife they did not choose. It was a tidy plan. It fit on a napkin. It would have worked, if not for one inconvenient variable. I am not dead yet. We catalogued each piece, dates, times, accounts, screenshots. We printed only what we needed. We did not send a single email. We moved like people who know the walls have ears. Leah brewed coffee and listened, occasionally asking a question that sent Dean into another file. Why does the assistant's phone ping near the wine cellar on the same nights the server is accessed? She asked. Dean frowned. Because she's sleeping with a security subcontractor who thinks the cameras are older than they are, he said. The disgust in his voice was not moral, it was professional. He hated sloppy work. On the morning of the hearing, the lobby of the courthouse smelled like cold stone and recent rain. Reporters formed a corridor. I walked through it with Leah beside me, her hand at her side, not on my arm, because she refused to be a prop in anyone's photo. Inside, the courtroom hummed with the brittle silence that comes before a performance. My daughters sat together, faces pale, eyes red. They looked like children who had wandered too far and were ashamed to admit it. Russell sat behind them with the taste of victory on his lips. Margaret took a front-row seat and folded her hands as if to pray. The judge entered, a woman with a gaze like a metronome, precise, unfriendly to drama. My lawyer, whose phone had burned for 48 hours, rose and spoke calmly. Your Honor, my client is old, not infirm. He is in love, not delusional. He is rich, and that is unfortunately the only fact in this case that appears to carry weight with the petitioners. The judge lifted a hand, and the room stilled. Evidence, she said, a word like a lever. They went first. Caroline testified about my forgetfulness, which existed, and about my supposed impulsivity, which did not. Elise spoke about her fear that Leah was not who she seems, a phrase so thin it might have floated away if the microphones had been less expensive. Russell, of course, positioned himself as the concerned son-in-law, reluctant to intervene but compelled by patterns of vulnerability. He presented the dossier. He pointed at photos. He held up credit card statements and spoke about fiduciary duty as if he had invented the term. Margaret delivered the heartstring speech. We lost my sister, she said, eyes glistening. We cannot lose him to this. There it was. The gravitational pull of nostalgia used to justify present violence. Then it was our turn. My lawyer did not posture. He asked permission to submit a timeline supported by server logs and camera footage. The judge agreed. Dean took the stand, professional muscles visible under a suit that did not quite fit his shoulders. He described the outbound data trickle, the destination accounts, the shell company, the assistant's phone pings. He did not accuse. He reported. The judge listened. Then my lawyer asked if we might play a short clip. The screen lit. Margaret appeared in grainy black and white, sliding documents into a leather envelope. The room exhaled. My daughters looked at each other with a confusion that broke my heart, because in that moment I saw their girlhoods flash. Two little figures running through sprinklers on a summer lawn, innocent of the complicated fences we would build. Next clip. The wine cellar corridor. Russell, checking his phone, glancing around, tucking a small velvet pouch behind the panel with the ease of a man who believes cameras are suggestions. The judge leaned forward. My lawyer approached the witness box and, with a politeness sharp as a blade, asked Russell why he had purchased a ring for a woman who was not his wife and hidden it in his father-in-law's home. Russell sputtered about surprise parties and misunderstandings. The judge's gaze did not flicker. My lawyer then called the jeweler as a witness. The jeweler, perhaps motivated by survival, produced the order form naming Lisa May and the note, "Not here," in Russell's hand. Then came the file, the letter, my letter. My apology to my late wife, once stolen, now recovered, included in the evidence trail as proof not of my weakness, but of theirs. My lawyer, with my permission, read a passage aloud about promises and repair. The courtroom stilled. I felt humiliation and pride tangle in my throat. Leah watched me, not the judge, not the screen, as if anchoring me to the floor while the past tried to carry me away. Finally, the judge looked over the rim of her glasses at my daughters and spoke softly, which made the words harder to bear. "Do you know who filed the initial request to obtain confidential foundation documents?" she asked. They shook their heads. "Your aunt," the judge said. "Under the influence, it appears, of your husband, Mrs. Hale, who has interests elsewhere. You were used," she added, not unkindly. Both girls started to cry in a way that carried no strategy, only grief. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Hale, do you understand the risks of entering into marriage at this time?" I said, "I understand the risks of not entering into it far better." She studied my face, perhaps searching for a wobble that would make her job easier. She did not find one. She denied the conservatorship. She warned me that love does not cure loneliness, that money does not erase suspicion, that families can be rebuilt or lost beyond recall, depending on the gentleness of the next 10 conversations. Then she did something no one expected. She addressed Leah. "Ms. Morales, the scrutiny will be unrelenting. Are you prepared for that?" Leah lifted her chin. "No," she said, "but I am willing." Indeed, we left the courthouse into a day that looked like a movie set. Clean sky after rain, reflective puddles, cameras winking like insects. The reporters shouted questions that sounded distant, as if I were underwater. My daughters approached, faces storm-wrecked. Carolyn hugged me so tightly my chest hurt. "Dad," she whispered over and over, like a name and a plea. Elise stood apart, as if unsure whether to bridge the gap. Leah stepped back, giving them space without surrendering her ground. What would happen next with my family was not for cameras. It was for kitchens and long talks and apologies that fit no headline. Still, I knew the battle was not finished. Russell had not been arrested. Margaret had not been condemned by any court but mine. The city's laughter had not quieted. It had merely paused to listen. That night in the apartment, Leah set the music box on the windowsill and wound it. The tune rose into the room, thin and stubborn, the sound of something working despite the attention of people who wished it would fail. I held her hand. The river moved. The phone buzzed with messages I did not open. I wanted to believe the worst was behind us. I wanted to. But as the music ticked, Dean's number flashed, and a text arrived with a single photo that made my blood run cold. A new envelope. A postmark from a town I hadn't visited in 40 years. My name on the front in a handwriting I knew as well as my own. My father's. Impossible. The dead do not write letters. And yet, there it was, sitting on the hall table at the estate, delivered while we were in court. I looked at Leah. She looked at me. She whispered, "What did they dig up?" And I knew, with a certainty that scraped the bone, that the people we had just fought were not the only ones preparing their knives. But the worst was still to come. I opened my father's letter on the library desk, where I had signed 1,000 contracts and only 2 vows. The paper was thin and cheap, the kind he favored, the kind that held sweat and secrets. The date at the top placed it a month before he died, a time when I was building my second warehouse and sleeping too little. The lines were blunt, the way he wrote when he did not want me to argue. He said he had made a mistake with a partner I thought I knew. He said a debt had been settled in a way that left a stain he could not scrub. He said he had kept a copy of a document because he did not trust the men in the room, and he was leaving it where no one would think to look, behind a panel in the wine cellar of a house I did not yet own, the same panel where Russell had hidden his ring. The symmetry made me dizzy. My father had hidden a truth in the same place my son-in-law hid a lie, as if men repeat the motions we inherit without knowing it. Behind the letter, folded twice, lay a carbon copy of a contract tied to the foundation's infancy. A donation from a figure the city now praises as a philanthropist, but whose money, the old city whispered, was washed clean in our halls. My father's note explained the bargain. They would fund our start if we agreed to keep our mouths shut about the source. It was not a crime to accept money. It was a sin to let it buy silence where honesty could have saved lives. Reading it, I felt the old shame rise. We had used darkness to build something that hosted light. The contradiction tasted like iron. I had two choices: bury the paper again, or bring it into daylight and let the consequences land where they would. I called my daughters. I asked them to meet me in the library. When they arrived, their faces were less guarded. Shock has a way of sandblasting a person down to something truer. I showed them the letter. I told them what it meant. They leaned over the desk like girls bending over a puzzle on the floor, foreheads nearly touching. Caroline swore under her breath, a word I'd scolded her for when she was 9. Elise asked if this meant we had to return every dollar ever donated by anyone whose hands weren't clean. No, I said. It means we stop pretending we didn't know what we chose not to know. We made a decision. The gala would go on, but the speech would be mine, and it would not be the speech the board drafted. I did not ask permission. I informed them. They blanched in silk. Good. Let silk learn to sweat. On the night of the gala, the chandelier light made the room shine like a lie. Couples arrived in clothes that cost more than some families' yearly rent. Waiters glided like well-trained ghosts. Leah wore the dark blue and stood beside me, not behind. When the time came, I climbed the small step to the podium and looked at a room that had fed me, fought me, and tried to fold me neatly into its napkin. I began with what they expected: gratitude, statistics, the year's achievements. Then I told them about my father, about a night long ago when fear masqueraded as pragmatism, about a contract we accepted and a silence we kept because we believed the ends would justify the means. A ripple moved through the room. Some faces hardened, some softened, others tried to maintain the neutral mask that passes for sophistication. I went on. I did not punish the dead. I did not name the donor because public humiliation is not cleansing. It is spectacle. I named the principle that institutions like ours must be brave enough to declare where lines are drawn, even when the pen shakes. I announced the creation of a public ledger for major gifts, transparency audits, and a fund for communities harmed by the very systems that make such galas necessary. I said we would make mistakes. I said we would try again. I said courage was not a one-time performance. It is a habit. Then I did something the PR team would later beg me to regret. I switched to the personal. I told them I was marrying Leah. I told them they could call it foolishness. They could call it scandal. They could call it a phase, a midlife crisis arriving late to a man whose midlife had been spent hauling pallets and learning how to smile in rooms that didn't want me. They could call it anything they wished. I would call it a choice to love, while I still remember how to pronounce the names of the people I love. I told them that those who had tried to save me from myself had in fact tried to save my money from leaving the orbit of their expectations. I did not name them. I did not need to. The truth has a way of pointing its own finger. For a heartbeat, the room was motionless. Then one person began to clap. It was not a grand gesture. It was Leah. She clapped once, softly, looking at me, not the room. The sound broke the spell. A second clap, a third, then the board chair, who loves being seen loving the right things, followed suit. Applause gathered like rain. Some hands never moved. Fine. Not every tree bends in a storm. The ones that don't are often uprooted first. Afterward, my daughters approached Leah. Their eyes were cautious but not cruel. Caroline said, "We need to speak about boundaries." Leah said, "We need to speak about respect." Elise said, "We need to start over." Leah nodded. I did not try to choreograph it. They would find their way, or they would not. My part was to stop making their fear the governor of my engine. As for Russell, he left the room early, jaw clenched, phone already pressed to his ear. By morning, he had resigned from the company to pursue other opportunities. Those opportunities, it turned out, involved explaining to an investigator why payments flowed from a shell company to an assistant who had no memory of consenting to receive them. Margaret retreated to a house 2 hours away where grief, unexamined, can harden into a world view. I did not send vengeance after her. I sent silence. When she is ready to say the words that matter, she knows how to find me. A month later, Leah and I married in the garden by the east wing under magnolias that held onto their blooms like lanterns. The guest list was small by design. Marta cried. Dean stood in the back, eyes scanning the horizon, as if trouble might RSVP late. My daughters walked with me to the arbor and kissed my cheeks in a way that didn't erase damage but acknowledged repair. The officiant spoke about vows as a craft, not a moment. We said yes. The music box played, a thin tune, imperfect, relentless. We danced to it anyway. People still laugh, different people now, the ones who need a story to feel superior to. They will always find a rung above someone else and announce the view. Let them. Laughter cannot break a life that is held together by deliberate hands. And when the tune slips, as it does sometimes even now, Leah takes out her small file and coaxes the teeth back into place. We do not pretend things fix themselves. If you stayed with me to the end of this storm, subscribe to the next chapter of my life. Not because I am a spectacle, but because you may one day need to borrow a little courage. Take mine. Use it, spend it. Replenish it by saying yes to something people tell you you're too old or too young or too poor or too rich or too anything to deserve. If you are laughed at, smile. Laughter is just air. It cannot pierce you unless you press it into your own skin. Here is my last truth tonight. The worst was not the petition or the headlines or even the realization that people I loved believed I was safer absent from my own life. The worst would have been surrendering the right to choose love because it made other people anxious. That is a debt no man should pay. I didn't. Neither should you. Stay with me. There are more magnolias ahead, but there are also winters. We will keep the box wound. We will listen. When the song falters, we will file the teeth. And when the crowd gets loud, we will turn down the room and turn up the music, and we will dance, because we are still here, because we said yes, because the laughter was never the point. The point was living, and now that we are doing it, the only thing left to say is this: keep listening. There is more, but the worst, for now, is behind us.